Today we're discussing 6 wide receivers who deserve a lot more attention in fantasy football this year. And we'll start with a veteran receiver who goes 52nd overall, and it's Tyler Lockett with the Seattle Seahawks. And look, you can see he goes well after his teammate, second-year player, the younger player, sure, Jackson Smith-Njigba, who goes 50 or 43rd overall. And look, the elephant in the room is that Tyler Lockett is an aging receiver. He's going to turn 32 this season. I understand that. But he really hasn't shown a ton of signs of dropping off. 2 years ago, he was like the best receiver at getting open against man coverage. And this past year, he was top 20 in expected points added, that's his wide receiver efficiency, and was still highly respectable at winning routes versus man coverage, 21st overall at beating man coverage. And not only that, but Lockett averaged over 7 targets per game last year, which proves that he could just still get open. Now, there's no doubt about it, his teammate Jackson Smith-Njigba can break out in year 2. The former first-round pick is a talented player, but he's just not as versatile as Lockett in terms of winning on the inside in the slot and the outside. Now, there is one key downside for Tyler Lockett's profile this year, and it's that he restructured his contract this offseason. He took a pay cut, and now he's likely not going to be on the team after this year. Now, maybe that means they start to give their investment, the former first-round pick Jackson Smith-Njigba, more usage, but if Lockett's playing well, it doesn't mean you should just take him off the field. It wouldn't make sense. But the optics aren't great there, and they have a new offensive coordinator in Ryan Grubbs, who maybe just starts to favor the younger player since he knows he's going to have him in the future. But that said, Grubbs comes from Washington, the college football program that was an elite offense. They would spread the ball out all the time, which is actually good maybe for all of these receivers, including Lockett, who is the cheapest one in drafts. And he's one of the most reliable receivers we have ever seen. If you look at his games played right here, and you scroll back all the way to when the schedules used to be just 16 games, like you can see right here, he has only missed 1 game ever in a season his entire career. This is an 8-year NFL career, never missed more than 1 game in a season. Check that, it's a 9-year NFL career, even more impressive. And look, generally speaking, I don't like drafting older players. These 31, 32-year-old receivers, it's not fun, but you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. And what we've seen is that Lockett is still producing. He was just a wide receiver 37 last year. Before that, a top 20 receiver basically every season, but now he's taken outside the top 50 receivers, even though he only scored 5 touchdowns last year, which was by far his fewest in the last 6 years. Had poor quarterback play with Geno Smith. If those things just slightly improve and Lockett continues to remain healthy, he's going to finish right around a top 30 receiver yet again. Now, the next man we got to talk about is Dontayvion Wicks, because whenever a rookie wide receiver, especially a 5th-round rookie from last year in Dontayvion Wicks, starts drawing comps during the season to Devontae Adams, yeah, you got to pay attention. And it's not just because he had the Packers uniform on. I'm sure that helps, but he was a top 25 receiver in yards per route run, which is an efficiency metric. It's usually like the stickiest stat to show how good you'll be in the future. But perhaps the most impressive part is as a 5th-round rookie, let me keep saying that. I mean, a lot of teams just missed out on him. He was 4th overall in winning against man coverage. A top 5 receiver, not just out of the rookies in the entire NFL at beating man coverage and getting open last year. And we saw it towards the end of last year when he was actually healthy. He started to develop a chemistry with his young quarterback, Jordan Love, scoring 4 touchdowns in his final 3 healthy games. But despite all of this, Wicks right now goes on Underdog as the wide receiver 65. And Underdog usually favors receivers. So on Sleeper, he's going to go even later in like the 70s or 80 as the 143rd overall player. He is going as the 4th Packers wide receiver, which makes sense. There's a lot of young, exciting receivers in Green Bay. You have Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, but out of all 3 of those guys, none of them are as efficient and good of a route runner as Dontayvion Wicks showed last year. And when you look at the receiver room, yeah, it is really interesting. Even Bo Melton was great, having 100 yards in a game last year, the only Packers receiver at one point last season. They have their 2 young tight ends entering year 2 in Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. So there is a lot of competition here, but it also means that a 5th-round pick last year in Dontayvion Wicks can get on the field, and it's just going to come down to merit because none of these guys are making a lot of money. And maybe merit's not the best word, just overall skills. And I think Wicks has the best at getting open, and we saw that in the second half of last year. So yeah, if this video is around guys who deserve more attention, I think the player that's going outside the top 60 wide receivers but was a top 5 receiver at getting open against man coverage last year deserves a lot more attention in fantasy. Now we got to go to the Chargers offense, where there's been a lot of hype around 2nd-round pick Ladd McConkey, the rookie. And look, I've been part of that hype. I really like the guy. But if this team is going to throw 500 plus times per game, they're going to have somebody else catch passes, and Josh Palmer is going to be that guy. And if you're saying, oh, they won't throw that much, well, the team that threw the fewest last year threw 500 times. And then you consider that Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, Mike Williams, even Gerald Everett are all gone from this team. There is 254 vacated targets available, which leads the NFL. This Chargers offense needs some help. And even with all of those guys on the team last year, all of those playmakers, Josh Palmer still finishes the wide receiver 44. The year before that finishes the wide receiver 42. And now all those guys are gone and all those targets are now available. But despite that, you're seeing Palmer going all the way as the wide receiver 58 in drafts. It doesn't make any sense to me. I get it. They're going to be possibly, at least it projects to be, less pass heavy, but they're still going to throw 30 to 35 times a game. So even if the Chargers rank dead last in passing and Josh Palmer only sees his 17% target share from last year, which you would think it would improve with all those guys gone, you're going to see Palmer seeing over 5 targets per game, which is fine based on where he's getting drafted. But what happens if the Chargers just finish bottom 10, not dead last, and they throw 550 times, and Palmer sees a little bit more targets because all those other productive players aren't there anymore, and he earns a 20% target share? Well, in this scenario, Palmer would earn 110 targets on the season, or 6.5 per game, which is pretty dang good based on where he's going drafted and the fact that he has a quality quarterback in Justin Herbert. Look, long story short, other than second-round pick Ladd McConkey, who I do think is talented, the competition is going to be a 7th-round pick. It's going to be Quentin Johnson, who struggled last year, a newcomer in DJ Shark. I think Josh Palmer is better than all these guys, and he has 4 years of already established experience with Justin Herbert to kind of back that up going into the year. This isn't a player that I think is going to win you your fantasy league. You gotta have him. He's the must-have player, but he's a guy who I think is going a couple of rounds far too late based on my fantasy blueprint. Now, maybe a guy who could actually win you your league based on where he's going is Christian Kirk, who I'm surprised to see is going outside of the top 30 wide receivers right now in fantasy drafts, and to me, he is the best receiver on the Jaguars. And I think he's been the best receiver on this team based on how often Trevor Lawrence has been targeting in the last 2 years, even with Calvin Ridley there last year. Kirk has averaged 7.5 targets per game the past 2 seasons as a Jaguar. And as you can see right here, in his 30 career games these last 2 years with the Jaguars, he's averaged 13.9 points with Trevor Lawrence in those games, 7.5 targets. This is way more, 22% more than he did without him in the previous years as an Arizona Cardinal, averaging just 11 fantasy points per game. And that 13.9 points per game with Trevor Lawrence would have been good enough to finish 22nd overall last year in fantasy football, and now Calvin Ridley and his 135 targets are gone. And all signs still point to the Jaguars still being a pass-heavy team. They took a first-round wide receiver in Brian Thomas Jr. They signed Gabe Davis to a pretty significant contract. These guys replaced Christian Kirk, or they replaced Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones in the offense, and I honestly think potentially they're downgrades. Because Brian Thomas might be great, but will it be right away in the NFL? We already know that last year Calvin Ridley was good if he was able to earn almost 140 targets. So I like Christian Kirk as the wide receiver 31 in drafts. He's the only starting receiver right now on his team who actually has an established connection with Trevor Lawrence, and Trevor Lawrence already the past 2 years loves throwing to him 7.5 times a game. All right, now for this next player, let's dive really deep down the rankings. One of those guys who's not even drafted in a lot of drafts. Drafted in a lot of drafts sounds funny. Taken in a lot of drafts, and we're going to go to the wide receiver 82, the 194th overall player, the 17th round of underdog drafts, undrafted in most drafts, and that is Demarcus Robinson, who is a wide receiver for the Rams. And if you are not familiar, towards the end of the season last year, he was actually a top 12 receiver in fantasy football. Yeah, I'm not lying. Because from weeks 13 to 17, his final 5 games, he averaged 15.4 fantasy points and 6.8 targets per game. And he did this while playing next to target hogs in Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. And yes, Cooper Kupp was healthy for those games. During that stretch of production for Robinson, Cooper Kupp was actually averaging 8.8 targets per game, and Robinson was still able to be productive. And the way that they used him was pretty impressive. Sean McVay used him as his downfield receiver because Robinson saw a career-high 14.3 yards per reception, and even though he didn't get actual playing time until week 12, it took him 12 weeks of the season, he saw almost a career high, the second most in his career air yards. And it should be noted that he beat out Tutu Atwell, who during the beginning of the season was having a quality year, and then in the mid to late part of the year, it was Demarcus Robinson who took the job from him. So when I start to see guys like Marvin Mims, Luke McCaffrey, heck, you could keep going, Wan'Dale Robinson, all these guys are going before Demarcus Robinson, I'm just confused because some of those guys are the wide receiver 3 or not even starters on their team, where Robinson is a starter, proved it last year, and has a quality coach and quarterback. Now, before we get into the guy who I think is flying under the radar at the wide receiver position the most, I want to let you know about the fantasy blueprint. And I also want to be cautious of your time. So basically, if you want to win your fantasy league or increase your chances of doing so, you just get the fantasy blueprint. You follow these 2 quick and simple steps, and here's the deal. Over 1,000 people used it last year, and if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'll help you all summer long and throughout the entire season, every week, sending you tools. It's just $10 for that entire time. If you don't make your fantasy playoffs for whatever reason, I'll just refund it. Doesn't even matter if half your team got hurt, I'll refund it. No questions asked, just reach out. And I've said it before, but last year we had over 1,000 people use the fantasy blueprint, and only 3 people reached out for a refund, which means that most of those people either found the tool helpful enough to not reach out for the refund, or they made their fantasy playoffs. So if you want to get the fantasy blueprint for 2024 to smack around your buddies, your competition, and just beat them, that's the whole goal here, well, you can scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below, and just make sure you follow the 2 simple steps. Now, to see the guy that I believe is going most under the radar, we have to talk about the Atlanta situation. Their quarterbacks got all the headlines this offseason. Kirk Cousins signed there, was a big deal, a lot of money, and then they took Michael Penix with the number 8 overall pick, which made a lot of shockwaves. And all of this made it really easy for their signing of Darnell Mooney to go completely under the radar, and that's a mistake. Because for starters, Mooney signed a significant contract, 3 years, $39 million. That is an average salary of $13 million per year, but maybe even more important, $26 million of that, 2/3 of it, is fully guaranteed. For Darnell Mooney, getting $13 million a year, that is significant. I mean, for comparison, that's twice as much as what Marquise Hollywood Brown is getting per year. And look, when you look at his recent stats, you might be like, that's crazy. Only had 31 catches last year, 40 catches the season before that. That's nothing for the most part, but then you have to remember the offense that he was in, because he played for the Bears and they were pretty atrocious in passing the last 2 years. Chicago ranked bottom 5 in the league in passing volume last year and dead last in passing volume in 2022. And not to mention, they had poor quarterback play when Justin Fields ranked 32nd. There's 32 NFL teams, 32nd in quarterback accuracy. But now Mooney's going to see a total change at the quarterback position and overall offense now that he's on the Falcons with a new offensive coordinator in Zach Robinson from the Los Angeles Rams. So maybe this means Mooney can be the downfield target for Kirk Cousins like Jordan Addison was last year. And Jordan Addison last year finished as a top 30 receiver, 13 points per game. Now we have to add context to this. Addison is a first-round talent. Mooney was not. And Justin Jefferson missed a good amount of time last year, so Addison got some wide receiver 1 reps. But that all said, it's not like Darnell Mooney hasn't showed us that he could be a productive NFL receiver. That's why he just got paid $39 million. Because the last time that we actually saw him be in a quality offense that didn't rank bottom 5 in passing, which the Falcons won't this year, they'll probably rank closer to top 5. Well, he puts up over 1,000 yards. He has 81 receptions. This was as the wide receiver 1, so I'm not expecting that type of production from Darnell Mooney when he finished that season as a top 30 receiver, the wide receiver 27 overall, 12.9 points per game. But I definitely think he could be a top 40 or top 36 receiver. But as you can see right here, that's not at all where he goes. He goes as the wide receiver 68. It's as if he's not even going to get starting reps. He's going to be a starting receiver in 2 wide receiver sets. Yet he goes after Ricky Pearsall, who's behind Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, and Deebo Samuel. After Quentin Johnson, who I don't even know if he's going to start this year for the Chargers, might be behind DJ Shark, Ladd McConkey, and probably Josh Palmer. And then a bunch of other rookies that went in like the 4th and 5th rounds of the draft, they're going ahead of Darnell Mooney. Makes no sense to me at all. Go ahead and draft Darnell Mooney. He deserves the most attention at the wide receiver position. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see the running backs who deserve more attention in fantasy football, well, then check out this video that we released earlier in the summer right here. And by the way, if you're not already subscribed, make sure to hit the subscribe button. We are pushing, fellas, towards 100,000 subscribers. That is the goal here. Let's hit it. I appreciate you a ton.